how did the Lutheran Church really get started, you know?
Yeah.
They were followers of Luther, but that's a small group, and there were no communications.
Oh, really? Well, those of you on the live stream and recording, welcome. We were just discussing the next course, which I will be teaching, which will be after Easter. This is the final of John's epistles. So after Easter, we'll pick back up with the history of Lutheranism. Not really going to be doing Reformation history. There's going to be a little bit of that. But the focus is kind of going to be on the latter, or the following generations after, right? I mean, this is a survey for 500 years. We're going to cover roughly a century a year, or a century a class. And it's going to be a quick class, and you could teach. I mean, I had a Lutheran Reformation history class in seminary, and that was a full quarter class, and they still couldn't cover everything. I mean, the history of the Reformation itself is enormous. But we're going to be doing a general survey of the 500 years. My current plan, and this is my plan, having not done any of the reading yet, is to kind of pick one major event per century. So, like the first one, we'll see how this ages for when I actually am teaching the class. But the first lesson is just going to be on kind of early post-Reformation. Then we're going to take a look at the 30 Years' War, which is, if you are unaware, is a major event in European history. The last European war over religion. They'll find other reasons to kill each other, don't you worry. But the last time that religion was the reason was the 30 Years' War. After that, it became nationalism and stuff like that. Then I think we're doing the Pietism controversy. Following that, the Prussian Union, and then we're going to talk about the Walkout and all that kind of stuff in the 20th century. But that's the current plan. Got my reading list ready to go. Yes?
Will you be covering like when the Lutheran faith kind of segregates itself into different branches?
Like in the Americas, like Alka? Yes, that's when I say the Walkout. Sorry, this is code for people who've been here long enough that know Walkout is synonymous with the LCMS splitting and fragmenting into Alka.
I was thinking that's
so we're gonna cover that, and I realized it's great, right? I grabbed my 2 books on general Lutheran history. I grabbed my book on the LCMS history, and I'm flipping through, which I'm realizing, looking at it, it's mostly just like synodical bullet points on like resolutions and things. It's going to be miserable to go through. Or it's going to be a lot of skimming, because it's like 500 pages for 2 of these classes, so it's going to be a lot of flipping through it. But it stops at 1960, and I'm sitting here thinking, that's completely useless for this last class, which kicks off in the 60s. So it'll be interesting at least to see the run-up and what the resolutions were in the 60s leading up to, because I mean, I'm getting ahead of myself by a whole class, but the roots, when I took a class on the Walkout, we started with World War II. So we started in the 40s.
When did the
that's not
happen?
true. In the late 60s, early 70s. That's not true. Our first class started with Luther. And of course, these guys are saying, well, we're going to trace the root causes of the Walkout and Seminex to Luther and his era. And I'm like, okay. And then we fast forward through like 400 years, and all of a sudden we're in the late 1800s and really World War II. But that's a whole conversation for another class, very specifically. Before we get going, I do have something I wanted to talk with you all about, just to kind of pull a survey together, if you will. I'm thinking forward already to next year and what I will be teaching, and I will say there's been something in my brain that I've been kind of stuck on.
That's good to know.
Yeah. Thank you, Annabelle. I'm currently very interested in teaching through the history of the Old Testament, and specifically like the biblical history. So 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, all of that. Well, Samuel was like 50 chapters. And so, yes, Bill, doing it my way, that's going to take us like 4 years to get through. And that's not even kids, right? And doing nothing but that. So I'm wondering, because like I said, this has kind of been on my brain. I'm wondering if there would be any interest in kind of a stream of conscious live stream class. So it would not replace the Wednesdays. But it would either be recorded just in my spare time. Well, I mean, right, kind of, yeah. Podcast style, maybe doing it on live stream, teaching.
Because it's, 2023.
Right, yeah.
Everyone's doing a podcast.
But anyway, would there be interest in something like that? It wouldn't be, none of you would be in person, right? This would be something that would pretty much just go on YouTube. If I can figure out how to rip the audio file and figure out a hosting platform, I would very much be interested in just posting an audio version as well. Would there be interest in something like that?
I would listen to it on my drive here.
There you go.
So instead of anything on the Wednesday night?
No, this would be an additional.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It would be unrelated. Quite frankly, I'd probably do a lot of it over the summer when I'm not teaching Wednesday classes, and then would release it in theory, right? Theory and practice are different, but in theory,
I'm always interested in
right. In theory, I'd go through like all of 1st and 2nd Samuel over the course of the summer, and then I'd release it over the rest of the next year, and then the following summer I'd be able to do 1st and 2nd Kings or something like that. Just do a whole bunch of it all at once and then release it. If I do it live, that'd be a different story. But anyway, think about it. Let me know if something like that would be interesting
If
to
you
you.
don't have anything to do in the summertime, my yard needs some work.
Well, I'd much rather read a big blue book and then talk about it. Right. I don't think, well, you pay me to teach you the Bible. You don't pay me to do your lawn. But anyway, so think about it. Now, look at this. I was on a retreat with the confirmands. And so, all of you on YouTube, be sure to leave a comment with your opinions on this. Also, like and subscribe, because that is how you push the algorithm. And I mean, it's true, right? So I was talking to the confirmands about social media and all that kind of stuff. And,
Is Mark online right now?
I don't know. We have 2 viewers. I don't know who they are. But in theory, commenting and hitting that little like button on our YouTube videos gives us increased potential to go to people we don't know for the YouTube algorithm to actually push us. So if you are so inclined, leave a like and a comment, because the YouTube algorithm is all based on interactions. If you don't know what I'm talking about, right? Don't worry about it. But anyway, so
Just a thought on that.
yeah.
I can't remember whether it was a synodical convention or a district convention, but there was a presentation on the power of social media as it relates to getting the word out.
Oh,
I'm
absolutely.
not sure that our congregation understands the
Well,
power of that.
I don't think the LCMS does. I was talking with some pastors recently, and they were.
It's a double-edged sword because
Yeah,
a lot
it
of
is.
stuff on
There's a
social
double-edged
media
sword.
I don't trust because
Right.
it's on social media.
But there's a number of pastors coming out of the pandemic who kind of bemoan live streaming and social media in general. And I kind of came back at I had a conversation with some pastors recently, and I heard those kind of comments, and I said, "Well, what do you think of the Lutheran Hour Ministry?" Like, "Oh, Lutheran Hour Ministry is great." So, well, yeah, they were like one of the first radio stations, right? That was when Lutheran Hour started, when KFUO started. That was cutting edge technology. Lutherans, historically, very much not true now, but historically Lutherans have been on the cutting edge of technology, right? Think Luther, right? He was using the printing press. That was the brand new tech for his day, and that's why you are a Lutheran. If we really want to get down to it, because
That's why I couldn't be killed.
that's why you're not a Hussite, right? How many of you, raise your hand if you know who Jan Hus is, right? He was Luther 100 years before Luther, but he didn't have a printing press. So when he went to his Diet of Worms, brought all his books, they arrested him, burned him and his books, and done with that. It didn't quite go away, but that's, by the way, what Luther was expecting to happen at the Diet of Worms. He was walking into Worms thinking, all right, They're going to get, where's the campfire? He was expecting to be burned because that's historically what the church had done to folks like him. But his stuff was printed. It was everywhere. People all over the place knew about him, who he was, and so they couldn't do that. It wasn't possible anymore. Anyway, I agree. What is the cutting edge technology of our day? It's social media. It's social media. I will say, I did this without any consent from the council. I have one council member here. I did offer them all a job. I said, if any of you want to start working on our socials, putting YouTube shorts, Instagram reels, these kinds of things you've probably never heard of. At least some of you have probably never heard of. If you guys want to start putting these together, I said, guess who has control of our YouTube channel? Guess who else has control of our YouTube channel? No one. You know why? Because I'm the only one with the password. No one else has asked me for it yet. So I told our middle schoolers, I said, hey, if you want to do this, I'll give you the password to our YouTube channel. And that got them excited, so we'll see. But yeah, anyway, I think there's something to that. How is the word getting out?
But just think about it. We post a worship service.
Mm-hmm.
One person posts a share. All of their friends are gonna at least see it.
For what it's worth, and I'm a very strong proponent of our live streaming. I really am. I'm going to push that until I'm not here anymore. But quite frankly, if we're trying to get new folks coming in, the live stream of our service is not the way. Do you know why?
No.
It's way too long. It's an hour long. The next best thing for us to do, and I'm looking at a way of doing this, is to clip the sermon and just put the sermon out there. Now, don't get me wrong, we're not just going to start doing sermons up here, nothing else. The worship service is extremely important. If we're looking to reach an unchurched audience, they don't care about confession and absolution. They don't care about the scripture reading, right? If we have any hope, it's through a sermon that's going to connect. And quite frankly, that's not what I told it has to do with the sermons, was what I told the high schoolers, or the middle schoolers, if they wanted to do this to start with. But you know what the problem with the sermon is? It's too long. People won't listen to it. So I said, because I make them do outlines and reviews of my sermons, not for all of them, for a number of them. I said, if you're doing an outline and you hear a quote that stands out to you, I said, write it down. We'll find it in the sermon. We're looking for a minute is long for this sort of thing. Let's get sound bites. That's how folks are interacting most of the time, not exclusively, but I mean, think about how people who are younger than anyone in the room right now are interacting. You might have no idea,
TikTok,
right? But I asked the 8th graders while we were driving back. I said, "What social media are you on?" Give us some guesses. None of them are on TikTok, interestingly.
what are they on?
Well, I'm curious if any of this room can even name any.
Be Real, Instagram.
They did mention
Snapchat.
Be Real, yeah. Those were the 3. Be Real, who's heard of that other than Katie? Instagram?
Yeah, I've heard of
Instagram's for boom.
And Snapchat?
I've heard of Snapchat.
Yeah, those are the ones that they're on. And you know what all those have in common? Be Real's a little bit different. I didn't know what Be Real is. They explained that one to me. I don't think there's a way for us to incorporate Be Real, but the common thread of Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok, which they don't have it, just because they're not old enough, is my guess. And TikTok has a bit of a bad rap in the culture.
Well, TikTok is dangerous, yeah.
But
How?
well, the thing that they all have in common is sound bites. That's what everything is. Sound bites. That's how folks interact. That's how folks interact with each other too. Anyway, we're not talking at all about 3rd John at the moment. We're far afield, but 3rd John's not going to take us very long, so it's an okay conversation for us to have. Anyway, I think there are a number of places in which we can, I'll say expand, because technically we do have one, but expand our social media presence, right? I asked the kids in my car, how many of you have a Facebook? I knew the answer. They all said no. I said, do you know someone who is in your generation who has a Facebook? They said no. No one under the age of 30 uses Facebook. And the only people who are under the age of 30 who use Facebook, the only young people that I know of who are on Facebook are on there because they went to college and their college required them to have a Facebook for roommate coordination. And that's how they did it, is through Facebook. Other than that, and that's the only reason they ever use it, was for that coordination. Which is part of the reason why we moved off of exclusively Facebook. Because no one's on Facebook, or so few folks are on Facebook. And we have a decent chunk of folks in our congregation, but again, no one my age or younger is on Facebook.
You have a Facebook?
I have a Facebook. Bill, ask me when the last time I logged into my Facebook was. It was actually about a week ago. I had to do something completely unrelated, but before that, it had been about a year and a half. It was about the middle of the pandemic that I was just like, I'm not on Facebook. I haven't, other than that one time where I needed to log in for a business thing, essentially, haven't even
So
touched
there's
it.
YouTube?
No. YouTube is a longer form social media, although there is YouTube Shorts, which are short clips. It's essentially to compete with TikTok. But no, Instagram, Snapchat, and Be Real are the three, as far as I can tell, the three big. Oh, and TikTok are the four big ones.
I know my grandkids don't have Facebook. Or, well, they do, because that's where I, say hello to them.
I'd be willing to bet if it weren't for you, they would not.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are people on Facebook, right? We have continued, we're streaming on Facebook right now. But I'll tell you this, the reason we are streaming on Facebook right now is because the Mevo doesn't support live streaming on YouTube. If it did, we would be on YouTube. There are no qualms I have about that in saying that. Absolutely. The only reason we're not currently live streaming on YouTube rather than Facebook is because we cannot stream on YouTube with that camera.
So, the live stream, let's say on Facebook, do you have to have some sort of permission? I don't know how that works.
Well, tell you what, we can talk minutiae and the technical details of how we run all these things another time. Quite frankly, so we'll leave it with this. The individual who set up our live streaming system as we have it now, so kind of a more permanent system rather than the ad hoc one we put together right at the beginning of COVID, was Kippy, if you guys know Kippy. And I remember he and I were talking. He said, I won't give you all the technical terms, but the program we use, he said we can stream on 3 platforms: Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And he was so excited to have us live stream on Twitch.
What's Twitch?
It was really.
It's for gaming live streaming primarily.
It allowed the cameras to look at the person playing a video game and the screen of the video game at the same time.
Yeah, it is a platform, a streaming platform that was initially designed for the video game industry. Right? You know what I told Kippy? I said, Kippy, probably 12 people in this congregation who even know what a Twitch is. Right? I said, I appreciate it. It'd be great, but no, we're not going to start streaming on Twitch. So we don't. That's a platform we could theoretically be on, but we will have no audience there. I don't really know of any churches that stream on Twitch. Again, that's not where the audience is. They're looking for a different kind of entertainment. 3 John. I want to do the same thing we did with 2 John because it's short enough, and have a volunteer to read through the whole book.
I'll read the whole
Thank you, Jeff.
The elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. Beloved, I pray that all may go well with you, and that you may be in good health, as it goes well with your soul. For I rejoiced greatly when the brothers came and testified to your truth, as indeed you are walking in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Beloved, it is a faithful thing you do in all your efforts for these brothers, strangers as they are, who testified to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God. For they have gone out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support people like these, that we may be fellow workers for the truth. I have written something to the church, but
Diotrephes,
who likes to put himself first, does not acknowledge our authority. So if I come, I will bring up what he is doing, talking wicked nonsense against us. And and not content with that, he refuses to welcome the brothers, and it also stops those who want to and puts them out of the church. Beloved, do not imitate evil, but imitate good. Whoever does good is from God. Whoever does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself. We also add our testimony, and you know that our testimony is true. I had much to write to you, but I would rather not write with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon, and we'll talk face to face. Peace be to you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends, each by name.
All right, so the contention of this class and the commentator we have been using is that 3 John is a personal appendix to the main body of John's epistle, that is 1 John. Of course, with 2 John being kind of the cover letter for the whole thing. And at least the way I, in reading through it, and maybe you can connect with this, is that, well, in general, this epistle does not have an overly theological tone to it. Certainly not like 1 John, and even 2 John is a more theologically driven epistle. To me, this epistle reads very businesslike, right? Jeff, you can imagine this being emailed to a church council, right? This is John sending a business email to the church. At least I think that's a good way for us to look at it, right? It's an inter-office memo, right? I think that's kind of the sense, and I think the church council being the recipient, it kind of fits with what he's talking about. John, at no point in this epistle, mentions Jesus, right? Which is in direct contrast to 2 John, where the only person John mentions is Jesus. He doesn't mention Jesus at all. However, he does mention 3 individuals. Gaius, who is the one he is specifically writing to, who, as the commenter said, Gaius, who is encouraged, Diotrephes, who is condemned, and Demetrius, who is commended. And we'll take each of these in turn as we go along. But I think when we view 3 John, again, in the context of how we've looked at the epistles in this course, 2 John being that cover letter, 1 John being the main body, and then this following along after for one particular individual, right, or a particular congregation, and one individual being the recipient of that, I think the greater understanding of what John is doing can be revealed, right? Because, quite frankly, as we said, this isn't an incredibly theological book of the Bible, right? You can learn a little bit, but what you can learn is more about our behavior in the church more than anything else, how we should act with one another, which, of its own accord, kind of makes 3 John not an important book, quite frankly. There's not a whole lot in there. However, if you take 3 John in the context of being an appendix to 1 John, you can import easily all of the thoughts and ideas, specifically that living in fellowship and hospitality, love and truth with one another, import those ideas, essentially say, well, Gaius had just read 1 John, and so everything John was talking about there is in his brain as he's reading this. And it kind of brings a little bit more out of the letter. It gives us a little bit more meat to this very short epistle. Not the shortest epistle, I mean, it's longer than 2 John, but not by much. So, thank you, Jeff, for reading the whole thing. Can I have someone read just the first 4 verses, and we'll take this one chunk at a time as we look through.
I will.
Thank you, Edward.
Just the first 4 verses.
Yep, 1 through 4.
The elder to the beloved Gaius,
Yep.
whom I love in truth. Beloved, I pray that all may go well with you, and that you may be in good health as it goes well with your soul. For I rejoiced greatly when the brothers came and testified to your truth, as indeed you are walking in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth.
So this is our introduction to the book. 3 John in general reads more like a secular epistle. Remember, we talked briefly about this, that the epistle just means letter, and it was a pretty formatted thing, a lot like professional emails. I think that's a good metaphor for us as we go through 3 John. They have standard openings, standard closings. They're all about the same length, or at least if you're going to go much further, people are going to get bored and not read the whole thing, right? And 3 John fits most closely with this secular form, more so than any other book of the Bible. It has a very brief addressee statement, right? Just John 1, or 3 John 1, the elder to the beloved Gaius whom I love and truth, right? That, when we compare that with some of Paul's openings, I, Paul, the servant of Jesus Christ, greet, yada, yada, and he kind of goes on and on and on. Even John does this in 2 John, right? The opening is longer, more wordy, there's a lot more going on. This reads a lot more like a secular epistle. And he just has this brief opening, more or less. The letter is addressed, as we said, to an individual named Gaius. Now, I'm sure you're all wondering, is this one of the other 3 Gaiuses referenced in the New Testament? Right? No, you weren't thinking that? Neither was I. There are 3 other Gaiuses referenced in the New Testament. It's extremely unlikely that this individual is associated with any of those other 3. Now, there is apparently a letter that mentions a leader in the church, or it's kind of a list that we have from about 100 years later. An individual named Gaius who became bishop in Asia Minor. Maybe it's that individual. But as far as biblical references to Gaius, it probably isn't. Gaius was an extremely common name of that era. That may sound surprising to you, but you know at least one historical Gaius. He was stabbed a number of times, right? Et tu, Brute. Julius Caesar, his first name was Gaius. Oh. He is Gaius Julius, and then Caesar was added on later. The Romans weren't very creative with their first names. They only had like 11 of them for men that they ever really used, and they would pair those with family names and other middle names is vaguely what we would do. That's why some of these Roman names, if you actually read the historical names, are very long. There's a whole bunch of words mushed together. It's because they just use combinations of a very short list of names. Gaius is one of those. Which does make it likely or possible that Gaius is a Roman citizen. A reference to Gentiles later makes us think he might be Jewish, but could have been any Jewish individual who was a citizen of Rome, right? So similar to Paul. But we're just guessing. Either way, Gaius was a phenomenally common name during this time frame. So the fact that there are other Gaiuses in the Bible shouldn't really surprise us. The introduction here is lacking any distinctive Christian nuance that is present in the other biblical epistles. This is kind of doxological stuff, I'm giving praise to God, those sorts of things. We see that John is rejoicing, but he doesn't say, for I rejoiced in the name of our God, Jesus Christ, because of this, right? So it's a much more standard kind of business tone of praise that goes with it. And I think this is evidence that this is an appendix. This isn't intended to be a standalone work. Even if it wasn't an appendix, I doubt John thought he was writing a book of the Bible when he wrote this down. I think he would have been surprised to find out that this is in our Bibles. Because there's a problem in one of the congregations under his control, and he's writing, like I said, he's writing a work email to address that problem. But we have it. But yeah, anyway, likely that the lack of reference to Jesus, the lack of this Christian nuance is because what was attached to the first and second John, which have a whole ton of references to Jesus in theology. Yes, Kate?
Why was it included in the Bible?
Because enough congregations thought it should be. So 3 John is part of the category of biblical books known as the Antilegomena. We've talked a little bit about this in the past. Most of the books of the Bible I've taught, at least while live streaming, are Antilegomena. That's not intentional. The book of Hebrews is Antilegomena, mostly because we don't know who wrote it. The 2nd and 3rd John are also Antilegomena because they weren't widespread. So what this means, as our refresher, is there are 2 categories of books in the New Testament. There are Homilegomena and Antilegomena. The Homilegomena books are the books that when the church gathered together, mostly at Nicaea, but it happened elsewhere, and as with everything, it's more complicated than that. But for our purposes, when the church gathered at Nicaea to decide what books were in the New Testament canon, what were not, the books of Homilegomena were books that everyone present agreed on. Yes, that they are part of the Bible. And they had criteria, 3 criteria: reference to Jesus as God and justifier, apostolic authorship, again, that's why Hebrews gets knocked, and widespread use in the church. So a bunch of, not everyone necessarily, but a lot of the congregations had them. 1 John, a lot of congregations had. Kind of fits our theory here as well. 1 John's the main body, right? Well, here's the cover letter, and only one congregation, or a very small group, got 3 John as an appendix. And so lots of people, lots of bishops were showing up to Nicaea, and people were saying, well, we should put John's 2nd and 3rd epistle in the Bible. They reacted, John wrote more than one epistle? It was kind of the sense there. By the way, the book of Revelation is also Antilegomena for that same purpose. It wasn't very widespread. And so why did 3 John get included? Enough churches said it should be. And enough churches thought it fit those 3 categories. For what it's worth, and this is always a point I like to add when we get here, is that there are books that people spoke for that are not in the Bible. So there were books that enough people didn't say yes and said. So one of them is The Shepherd of Hermas. A group of churches said, here we go, we have The Shepherd of Hermas, we should put this in the Bible, and enough congregations said no. That one, by the way, lacks 2 of the criteria, wasn't widespread, and the Christ as justifier is kind of not very obviously present. You can get there if you try. Shepherd of Hermas is very interesting, we still have it. If you read it, you can tell pretty quick that it doesn't sound like the Bible. But anyway, I think that's an important thing for us to know, to kind of quell any conspiracies or any kind of nonsense. Is that no, there were books that we did not let in that some people thought should be in, but for what it's worth, Athanasius in an Easter epistle that he wrote to his to Egypt, Lower Egypt, where he was bishop over, he gives us one of our earliest lists outside of Nicaea of books of canon, and he lists all of the books. He lists Shepherd of Hermas, the Didache, and a couple of others that are sometimes referred to as the pseudepigrapha, these books that didn't make it in. He said, once you're done reading the Bible, read those. Because they're really good and you should read them too. They're just not the Bible, right?
Well, what's in the Apocrypha?
That's Old Testament.
Okay.
It's a very similar thing, but for the Old Testament. There's some different nuance. The big thing is that prophets aren't the ones writing them. So for a book to be part of the Bible, it needs to be written by a prophet or an apostle. New Testament is apostle, Old Testament is prophet.
Well, was there a group before Nicaea that was passing judgment on what books ought to?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is part of that. It's a bigger question, but the 4 Gospels are almost immediately accepted. Like I said, we have someone who wrote about the year 176 who says everyone's known for forever that the Gospels are the Word of God, and the Pauline corpus was also almost immediately recognized. Angela's not here, and I'm referencing Polycarp again for her. So when you watch the live stream or the recording, Angela, this one's for you. Polycarp writes an epistle to the Philippians, in fact, and he does not reference the Old Testament. He does reference almost the entirety of the Pauline corpus and the Gospels as if they are Scripture. He says things like, you know the Lord has told us, and then he quotes out of 1 Corinthians. Polycarp was a disciple of John. Right? He died early in the 100s. So he, very, very early on, the church was de facto recognizing this. And you have people writing, Irenaeus of Lyon is the one that makes the very firm stance on the Gospels, writing about how these are the books. It becomes more official at Nicaea. It isn't finally nailed down until later. In fact, Athanasius includes the Epistle of Jeremiah in his list of the books of the Bible, which, if you're interested, it goes by a more commonly known name as Baruch. That's the letter Jeremiah wrote to Baruch, and so that's why we call it that.
What year is Athanasius?
Athanasius was at the Council of Nicaea, but he mostly does his work after that. So he's in the mid-300s is when he's kind of doing his thing. If you're interested in knowing more about this and about Christian history in general, there's an excellent book. It is A Simple History of Christianity. Oh my goodness. Church History in Plain Language is the name of the book by Bruce L. Shelley. It's about 1.5 inches thick. It covers from the apostles through the 20th century. But it is very good, especially in these earlier chunks. And when it says in plain language, it actually means it's in plain language. You do not need, again, it's like a 500-page book. You don't need to be a historian to understand it. And it's on like the 5th edition. Just buy the 3rd edition. It's cheaper. So what I have
What
to
is the name of the book again?
Church History in Plain Language
Okay.
by Bruce L. Shelley. It's an excellent resource. It does surveys of the history of Christianity. I will say I haven't read anything post-Reformation out of it, just because I stopped going to the men's Bible study that was reading through that book around that time because I had to work during it. So I can't attest to the more modern history aspect, and I was less interested in it, so I didn't read it of my own accord. But up through the Reformation, it's very solid. It's a very good book. At least the 3rd edition is. I haven't read the 4th edition. So, like I said, don't get the newest one, just get the 3rd. It's cheaper. But he goes through a lot of this stuff in detail, or in more detail than I'm going through. And he has dates and stuff like that I just can't pull out. Good. The last thing we have here is kind of a callback to 1 John. Is that reference to Gaius walking in truth. Right? This is a reference to his faith and his upstandingness in the congregation. And then I mentioned this one to Pastor Jordan, right? Verse 4, I have no greater joy than to hear my children are walking in the truth. The pastor is happy when his members have faith and walk in it. And you can probably add, and get along with each other, right? I mean, this is John as bishop, right? So he's over this whole congregation who's just happy. Gaius is making him happy because he's doing what he's supposed to be doing. And especially, we're going to see John not happy later. In just a few verses. But
there is this one guy.
Oh, yeah, he is not pleased. But with Gaius, he's happy. And so, I can just read so much like a church email. I can see Pastor John say, Gaius, my man, you're doing a great job. So good. But we got this other guy. Right. And we will get through that. Any questions on the first 4 verses before we continue? John's not quite angry yet. I'm going to volunteer to read verses 5 through 8. Please.
I'll do it.
Thank you, Bill.
Beloved, it is a faithful thing you do in all your efforts for these brothers, strangers as they are, who testified to your love before the church. You would do well to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God. For they have gone out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support people like these, that we may be fellow workers for the truth.
All right, the first 4 verses are the introduction. John's now getting to the issue at hand. And the occasion for this appendix, this epistle, whatever you want to call it, is these brothers that John references here. Based on the scant references that we have, the best guess is that these brothers that are referenced here and later are itinerant pastors, traveling missionaries. They're people who are passing through, teachers of some kind. It kind of harkens our mind back to Paul and Silas and all those guys who were traveling from one church to another doing missionary work as they go, or teaching the congregations as they went, right? So they would start with an apostle, learn something from them, and then the apostle would send them out to go carry on the teaching as they go, right? Because remember, at this point, there is no New Testament, at least, for the people to go pick up and read. They have to have people help them. And so this is probably what's going on here. Whether they're pastors, preachers, missionaries, we don't have enough context to know. But that's likely what's going on here. We got traveling theologians of one stripe or another that Gaius has shown hospitality to. And he's very pleased. John is very pleased with the way Gaius has interacted with these individuals. He commends Gaius for the hospitality that he has shown to these individuals. If we're keeping that church email theme going, Gaius is probably very relieved to read this, right? Gaius, you're walking in truth. You're making me happy. The way you've treated these pastors, these missionaries, is good, right? You do well, right? John doesn't quite leave it there. We'll talk about why Gaius probably was very relieved to have read that in our next section. But John encourages the hospitality toward the brothers, not only within the congregation, as was the primary focus of 1 John, right? But he also said, the brothers who are traveling through, these strangers, right? He doesn't know them, but they're brothers in the faith, and so his hospitality is well met. And then John concludes this section with some encouragement. Essentially, you've been showing them hospitality. I'm happy to hear that. And here's the sales pitch, right? You should give them money. Is really what John is saying, right? He encourages Gaius to financially support them as they leave. We see references here which, again, sound a lot like Paul on his missionary journeys. They don't have a source of income, right? This is what Jesus says in whatever chapter of Luke it is, right? Go and let the people that you're teaching to provide for you, essentially. They have no source of income or their well-being apart from the generosity and the hospitality of the believers, particularly in the congregations. They do not expect, nor do they accept any from those outside of the congregation. And when I say congregation, I should probably say the fellowship of believers, right? Which is probably what is being referenced in verse 7, right? They have gone out for the sake of the name. That's Jesus, right? An offhanded reference to it, or not a direct reference, but that's what he's talking about there. By the way, the name is an Old Testament way of saying Yahweh. And, of course, John is Jewish, and he's probably writing to Gaius, who is a Jewish individual. The guess there is because he says, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Now, we know, based on, 2/3 of the book of Acts, John is not saying, Gentiles aren't allowed to help these guys, Gentiles are outside the church, kind of thing. How I think we should be reading this reference to they're not accepting anything from the Gentiles is they're not accepting anything from unbelievers. He's just using carryover nomenclature, essentially. Do you have a question about that, Bill?
No.
Yeah. Which is why we think that Gaius, we know John was Jewish. This reference to doesn't accept everything from the Gentiles, you should give him something too. It kind of says, we're willing to guess that Gaius was probably Jewish. He probably wasn't a Gentile himself. Otherwise, John probably would have said they haven't accepted anything from unbelievers. But we're reading into things. I only got 15 verses to work from here. So, any questions on the commendation and the encouragement that John gives to Gaius here. All right. Verses 9 and 10, please. Anyone volunteer for that? Thank you, Katie. Oh, I thought you looked determined when you went over there.
Say the name again?
That's right. Why don't I read these, because it's got the really tricky name in it. So there we go. We got 2 more sections anyway. I got 2 of you over there who haven't read yet. It works out well. So I'll read 9 and 10. I have written something to the church, but Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first, does not acknowledge our authority. So if I come, I will bring up what he is doing, talking wicked nonsense against us. And not content with that, he refuses to welcome the brothers and also stops those who want to and puts them out of the church. So John goes from praise and encouragement to, as I said, he has now turned, or as I wrote, he has now turned his ire towards Diotrephes. He is mad at this guy. Hopefully I conveyed that through my dramatic reading. John is not in a good mood when he's talking about Diotrephes, right? So he turns his attack on Diotrephes, right? That opening line, verse 9, I have written something to the church. It's probably a reference to 1 John, right? Kind of, Gaius is reading this. He says, everything before this is for the whole congregation. This is not. This is for the church council. This is for the leadership of the church, because we got a situation we need to deal with, right? This isn't, don't go up and just read this because it's not going to be helpful to the situation, right? This is a more private matter, although Diotrephes has made this a public issue. But John doesn't want to deal with it publicly just yet. Although he does say, if I come, I will bring up what he is doing, right? So John essentially says, if I show up and he hasn't fixed what he's doing, I'm going to cause some havoc for this guy. So, what's going on with Diotrephes? Again, we do have to read in a little bit into who this person is and what he's doing.
He's a nonsense talker.
Yes. Anyone want to guess what the suspected role in the congregation that Diotrephes has?
Might be the president.
He might be the pastor, or at least what we would call a
It's
pastor.
somebody that doesn't accept the authority of the bishop.
The guess is, by the way, that Gaius was the primary patron of the church, hence the reference to give these guys money, which is typically how churches this early on worked. They had a patron. You can think Lydia, and most of the women in the book of Acts were the ones who were bankrolling everything, which is why Paul and Luke and all these guys praise these women so much, is because they have money and they're supporting the church. Right. Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, it's essentially, they can't do what they are doing without the patronage of these women. Gaius, our guess, is the primary patron of the church. So they're probably staying at his house, in the house church. He's probably the one that's funding most of what's going on. Diotrephes is likely some version of what we would call a pastor. He likes putting himself in a position of authority. He likes putting himself above other people. And he doesn't like being under authority, which unfortunately sounds a little bit too much like a lot of pastors out there. The office can attract these kinds of individuals, let's just say. And so Diotrephes, in some way, is a leader in this congregation. Whether he's the pastor or not sure. But he has some sort of leadership role. John accuses Diotrephes of 4 particular failings. The first is putting himself above others, right? And so we can kind of see 2 sorts of issues with this. One, John accuses Diotrephes of putting himself first and ignoring good order in the church and those put above him. Read John as the bishop. John's one way or the other. Diotrephes is not listening to John, is contradicting things John is saying publicly, and is causing problems. Essentially saying, well, I know better than John. Or John doesn't know what he's talking about, or I know better, something like that. He's putting himself above. And along with this, just by definition of putting himself above others in this way, but also as we get hints of with the other failings, Diotrephes is not serving those under him. Right? Remember, Jesus talks about this all the time. Whoever shall be first will be last. He who is above all will be a servant of all, those sorts of things. Right? What does it mean in the congregation to be in a position of authority? It means to serve the ones under you. Right? Jesus washes his disciples' feet, all that kind of stuff. Diotrephes is not doing that. He's in a position of power so that he can be powerful. That's how the world manages these things. That is not how the church is supposed to manage these things. The second accusation is that he's talking wicked nonsense against the church, right? He's using his position to demean and contradict John and those who support the preaching of the truth, or the apostolic witness in general. Now, I think it's worth noting, if this is an appendix of 1 John, where are we starting to at least wonder what category should we be putting Diotrephes in?
He's an antichrist?
Antichrist, false teacher, right? Someone to be kicked out of the church. Now, John clearly is not there yet because he wants to deal with this problem. But I think in the background, yeah, it's if you don't fix this by the time I show up, or if you don't respond and fix this when I show up, you're done. You're out, out of the congregation, no longer a part of us, an antichrist, right? Diotrephes is skirting that line. In theory, Diotrephes may have even been the one reading 1 John to the congregation, depending on what his leadership role was. Hopefully, the law has already started doing its work on Diotrephes, right? Whether it has or not, John wrote this epistle saying this is a situation that's going to be dealt with one way or the other. Yeah, absolutely. And this, the understanding that 3 John is an appendix to 1 John gives this section here, especially this talking wicked nonsense and that sort of thing, gives it a lot more weight. Because, at least in the context of 1 John, right? Antichrist is the word that, if we're not already, we're getting ready to apply to Diotrephes, which is not a good place to be. But that's the direction. Yes, yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways. The third accusation is he is refusing to welcome the brothers. Remember, this is the act for which Gaius was praised. So there's clearly conflict in the leadership. No matter what the roles are, it seems obvious that Gaius and Diotrephes are not seeing eye to eye. And so what Gaius is praised for, Diotrephes is condemned for not doing, right? Commend and condemned are way too close to each other, but anyway, it sounds nice and it looks nice when you write it down. Whereas Gaius is commended, Diotrephes is condemned. And it's for the same thing, or it's for the same issue, but landing on the opposite side. And then the final accusation is that Gaius is not allowing anyone to show the brothers hospitality. So it's not enough that Diotrephes is not showing hospitality himself, but he is actively stopping
Who are
others.
the brothers? Did you say?
These are the people who are passing through. Traveling teachers, preachers.
Oh, like your brothers in Christ.
Right, he references them as the brothers,
Okay.
which is a bit of a cryptic reference, which is why I can't tell you, well, this is what these guys are and what they're doing, but they're clearly, at the very least, they are Christians who are traveling through the congregation that Gaius is in, even if they're not teaching, although they're seen with the reference to supporting
Why
them.
did he become a pastor?
Well, power, who knows?
Yeah,
It's 2,000 years ago. It's hard to say. We don't have many details, but
this says a lot.
absolutely. Right. So Diotrephes is going so far as to remove the members who are being
I see why they
hospitable,
wanted to sit here now.
right, from the congregation. Right. This is a good look into how we should be behaving. Right. Remember, I said earlier that Gaius was probably pretty relieved to hear John commending him. There is a very, very high likelihood that Diotrephes is trying to oust Gaius from the church for being hospitable to these individuals, for supporting them. Right, so I would imagine Gaius and Diotrephes are in a very stressful situation, conflict in the church, and I can only imagine the breath of fresh air to have the Apostle John tell you no, guys, you're on the right side of
Can
this.
you
Right?
imagine how you
That would be nice, right? Next time we have an argument at church council, we'll just have the Apostle John say, no, Jeff's right about this one, guys. Wouldn't that be nice? No, I mean, so Gaius is getting encouragement, and I think, again, it sounds like Diotrephes is probably winning this. Again, another reason why we suspect Gaius might be the chief patron, because if Diotrephes is kicking people out of the congregation for being hospitable, who's the last person you're going to kick out? This guy with the checkbook, right? I mean, the world has not changed that much, and so it's likely that if Gaius is the benefactor of the congregation, that might be shielding him from the wrath of Diotrephes, right? Kicking, because it doesn't say he has considered a kicking member. He has done it already. It is a thing that has already occurred, and yet it seems at least Gaius is still in the congregation, so he hasn't been kicked out. We're assuming. So something's protecting him. Maybe he's just doing his hospitality secretly. Don't know. Somehow John knows about it though. Right. So this is an opinion of Diotrephes that Gaius seems to have ignored, and which is why John is praising. Right. So it's not only just a, hey Gaius, you're doing a good job, you're doing good stuff that you're doing. It's Gaius, you're in a fight and you're on the right side of this. Right. So that praise is heightened. Right. At least I feel like I would feel a lot better, again, if the Apostle John told me I was doing the right thing when I was disagreeing with someone in the church, who I don't know if they're an Antichrist or not, right? But yeah, questions on verses 9 and 10? All right. Volunteer for 11 and 12. Thank you, Katie.
Beloved, do not imitate evil, but imitate good. Whoever does good is from God. Whoever does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself. We also add our testimony, and you know what? And you know that our testimony is true.
So, this isn't a long section, but I can summarize it to you in an even shorter chunk. John's final lesson in his epistles here is a simple one, yet it is an important one. And it is this: don't be bad, be good. Very simple. He uses better language, but that's what he's saying is don't be bad, be good. To emphasize this point, or to kind of drive it home, John uses contrasts. He is contrasting Diotrephes. Give you one guess as to which side Diotrephes is on. He's the bad guy, right? And the good guy, who is this third individual mentioned, Demetrius. We don't really know anything about him, other than people are vouching for him. But Gaius knew who Demetrius was. Diotrephes probably knew, right? They know the context. They know everything that's going on. So John didn't feel the need to explain himself. But Diotrephes is the one who is imitating evil, right? How do we know Diotrephes is imitating evil? Other than the fact that John's angry at him. Well, the whole context of 1 John, remember? How do you show that you're in the truth? How do you show that you're in fellowship with God? Is by loving your neighbor. And Diotrephes is not doing that. Whatever Demetrius is doing, it is showing that love of God, love of neighbor, walking in the truth, which Gaius is also doing. All good stuff, essentially. Questions on 11 and 12? Like I said, not a tricky section there. All right. Right. Can you finish off the book for us?
I'm sorry, where are you?
11 or 13 to 15.
I had much to write to you, but I would rather not write with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon, and we'll talk face to face. Peace be to you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends each by name.
So he closes his epistle in the same way he began all of these epistles, by saying, I'd much rather just talk to you guys, right? So he writes it down. He has a lot to say to them. He has an issue in the church to deal with, but he's not, unlike Paul, who, I mean, think of Corinthians, Galatians, right? Paul deals with issues in the church in his epistles. Probably because he's not a bishop. Paul has a different role, different context, but John doesn't want to deal with the problem in the epistles. He addresses the issue, but he doesn't deal with the issue. He demonstrates his intention to be with them specifically, and I'll deal with it then. I'll talk with you about everything else we need to talk about. I'll handle this problem at that time, essentially. He doesn't want to write it down, more or less. He prefers the oral communication that we've seen throughout all of his epistles.
So what would John have been using at this time? Papyrus and
the two primary writing mediums would have been papyrus or vellum.
Vellum, which is lambskin.
Yeah, which is lambskin that's tanned and dried out. Vellum's really interesting because you can erase vellum by scraping it. And what's extra interesting is you can shoot with X-rays and you can see what they scratched off. And so sometimes
that's a portamento.
yeah.
It refers more to like art that's been covered up by another.
Right. Yeah. It's the
artwork,
same sort of thing. Well, because it's expensive. But yeah. So John's writing on one of those two in all likelihood. No idea which one. I wouldn't even be in a position personally to guess. But those are the two primary writing mediums. Obviously, paper doesn't exist in the West. It's in the... Actually, let's see, I'm listening to a history of China. Where am I? It's being invented in China right around now. So China is inventing paper now. Although it isn't until like right before Gutenberg that paper makes its way over to the West. So there's going to be vellum and papyrus and other sorts of things for quite a while. But that's more or less what they're writing on. I'm sure there are other mediums, but those are the two that survive to today. And whether that's what the epistles were written on, I would imagine, but I don't know that for certain. By this time, people aren't carving into rocks very much, right? So, or, I mean, if you go way back, like to the Sumerians, they were chiseling into clay, right? So they had clay tablets, kind of like our tablets, and they would push a stylus into it. That's why you get cuneiform and the straight lines with triangles. It's because that's the shape of the stylus you're using to push these lines in. By the way, this medium thing is why scripts go the direction that they do, right? So Hebrew was a language that was developed before paper and ink sort of writing style, when you were chiseling things a lot, and most people are right-handed. And so you hold the chisel in your left hand. It's a lot easier to chisel this way than it is to chisel that way. And so that's why Hebrew reads from right to left. Greek, by the time Greek was being developed, well, now we're writing down with a pen, right, for our purposes. Are any of you left-handed?
Of course I am.
Do you always have the pencil lead and the ink smears on your left hand?
Well,
I write with my right
hand right now.
Because for that reason, or
No, I think my mother, it used to be you were left-handed, it meant you were dumb.
well,
And so my mother
forced you to be right-handed.
forced me.
But I know. I
I
mean,
have it right now.
I was going to say, right? Left-handed people have to constantly deal with smudges on their hand.
Do you write upside? Do you write? Are you left-handed now, or do you write?
You still write right-handed, or
I write right-handed.
yeah.
You write instead of
Yeah, you got to do that.
right-handers. You have to drag it, but left-handers we have to go up like that.
It's because it's more. Now, if you're writing Hebrew, I had to deal with this for the first time in my life when I started taking Hebrew, right? And start smudging stuff because my hand was running over. That's why Greek and most languages developed after the advent of, again, anachronistically, pens go from left to right because it smudges less. And it's just easier to do.
They say left-handers can see better underwater.
Left-handers are in their right mind.
There you go.
There you go. But so that's what exactly they were writing with, or John was writing on. I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I get the impression that John was actually the one writing this. Paul seems to have had a scribe. Probably not called that, but this is why every once in a while, I think it happens once, and it's either in Corinthians or Galatians where Paul's really, really mad, and you get this line, I'm writing this in my own hand, see what big letters I'm writing with. This is because Paul is so angry that he's told his scribe to sit down, and which the big letters thing is also completely insane, right? We just talked about how expensive this stuff is. At this point in time, you didn't put space between your letters or your words. Why?
Paper's
Because it was
expensive.
too expensive. And
All paper.
Paul is so mad that not only does he not have his professional do the writing, but he does it himself, and he does it with big letters. He's being wasteful. He's throwing his money away because he wants to yell at them. That's how badly Paul wants to yell at them. And it doesn't read for us because it's printed, and all the letters are the same size. Really, they should put them in that section. They put it in like bold size 20 font.
Do they
Because
still
then it
have
would.
the picture of? Do they still have the original writing?
No, we don't have the original.
How do you know that it was written like that?
Paul said it. Paul says, "See, I write this in my own hand. Look at the big letters," and then he writes, just so that it's very obvious that he is very angry, right? And so the people who copied it down would know just how angry he was. Right, John is planning on visiting the congregation of Gaius, not only to deal with Diotrephes, but also to teach, commend the congregation, and as always, his desire is to do that face to face. Any questions that you have on 3rd John or any of John's epistles?
I thought it was interesting that he said, "The men from evil have not seen God," where most of the time he said, "are not from God."
Yeah, so there's a sense of, I just probably meaning about the same thing, but there's a bit of a nuance, right? Is that this Diotrephes, right? The people who are evil, right? They aren't even aware of God, right? They haven't even heard Him, let alone they haven't been sent by Him, right? So I know that is an interesting kind of nuance there, added level.
Like they wouldn't know good if they saw it.
Yeah, I think, right? It's like, well, how can they be from God if they've never even heard Him? And Jesus talks this way as well, right? No one has heard the Father, no one has seen the Father except the Son. Those who listen to the Son have known the Father. Those sorts of things. But no, absolutely right. I do think it is that sense of how can evil people be from God if they've never even heard Him? Yeah. I mean, they don't even know what God is, right? They have no idea. Absolutely. Good. Anything else? Look at that. We had a 20-minute rabbit hole at the beginning of this class, and we're still done early. 3rd John's not hard, guys. But you have done well. Next week's Ash Wednesday. I will not be here, so let me remind you now that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. I'll be reminding people I don't know about that next week. We will have our Wednesday services as usual, noon and 7:30, and then
7:30, not 7.
right. My class is 7. The service is 7:30. They end at about the same time. Probably the services end sooner most of the time. After Easter, the date is written down on a calendar somewhere. I don't know what it is, but after Easter, you'll hear about it in announcements and whatnot. We will be starting our History of Lutheranism class.
Is that the Wednesday after Easter?
Or will we skip a week?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Okay.
I have 5 classes, and I'm the one I have written down is also incorrect because there's going to be a day that I'm not going to be here because of a district thing that's going on. But that schedule will come out when we get closer to Easter and all that kind of stuff. As always, I want to encourage you, if you have anything you want to learn about, let me know. Our next class is something that we are studying because Bill Arndt asked for us to study it. He said, I've always wondered how we got from the Reformation to where we are now. And I said, okay, let's do it. So I mean, this one was a me class. Augsburg Confession was a requested out of the Book of Concord. I'm always happy to do a confessional. My goal, by the way, is by the time I'm dead, to have taught all of the Book of Concord and all of the Bible, and as many history classes as I can shoehorn into this. So,
So what's all in the Book
What
of
happens?
Concord? Large Catechism and
Small Catechism, Large Catechism, Augsburg Confession, Apology to the Augsburg Confession, the Small Called Articles, Power and Primacy of the Pope, and the Formula of Concord, as well as the Ecumenical Creed. So that's
you have to live a long time to cover all that.
it's a lot less than the Bible.
Yeah.
I have looked at the length of some of these books in the Bible with terror, and then I have thought forward to there are some books of the Bible that I'm like, I have already in my brain relegated to when Pastor Jordan retires and I have the Sunday morning class, because I will not, like, not necessarily, but I thought I had had a couple requests for the Book of Revelation, and for me to do the Book of Revelation justice, it would take an entire year's worth of Wednesday classes. So we'd start in the fall, take a break, pick it up during this chunk, take a break, and then finish it after Easter.
We've probably done that 3 times in this congregation.
I have taught Revelation once all the way through here to a group.
Larry Teeman taught it one time.
Oh, it was just in general.
Yeah.
Well, whenever you ask for requests for a book of the Bible to teach or anything to teach Revelation, always comes up. I've taught it here twice. Once to the high schoolers and once to an individual who I told them that they would have to wait for me to teach it to a class, but that wasn't good enough for that person. And they just started showing up in my office and said, "You should teach me Revelation. That's what we're going to talk about today." And 22 days later, actually probably took us longer than that. So like half a year later, we finally finished it. So this is like this is somewhat akin to the parable of the widow and the unjust judge, right? If there's something you really want to know and I'm just not teaching it for one reason or another, just bother me until I don't have a choice to teach it. It will be a private lesson, but if you want it, like I said, you just keep showing up in my office. We'll set a regular time, and I'll teach it to you. But yeah, so. But if you do have anything in particular, leave a comment on the YouTube. Right? The more times you comment, the better. I think. I don't know.
Yes.
But feel free to leave a comment. Talk to me during the next class. I'll bring those little half sheets out again. Like I said, I've got a couple things swirling around in my brain. Thank you, Annabeth. I had a couple ideas swirling around in my brain already, but nothing. Everything is nebulous for next year. So
What's nebulous?
I haven't hammered it down and set it in stone. So
Okay.
it's still
Floating in the ether.
floating in the ether. That's right. Well, let's close then with the Lord's Prayer. Our
Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory,
forever and ever.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. I'll see you all again after Lent.
You know, back to this thing we talked about at the beginning,
Social
Guess what,
media.
right?
unpopularity on Facebook.
Right,
My boyfriend's
yeah.
coming on Sunday.
Huh?
My boyfriend will be